6 party leaders in the Commons have said there should be an inquiry into the use of NHS contaminated blood products in the 70s and 80s. Leaders of parties, including Labour and the DUP, told the Prime Minister victims have a right to know what went wrong. This is such a massive scandal. I wonder if it gets talked about as much as it should do. At least 2,400 people are thought to have died after being given NHS blood products infected with hepatitis C and HIV. Andy Burnham today has called for this inquiry, but saying that he'll go to the police if that doesn't happen. The police need to examine that as well. Well, we're going to talk to Jason Evans, who's the founder of the Factor 8 campaign. He was 4 years old when his father, Jonathan, died after being infected with HIV through treatment with contaminated blood. He joins me now. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, good to speak to you. Thanks for having me on.
What are you looking for? Before we get to that, I'm so sorry for what's happened to you and your family. What a terrible, terrible tragedy. Do you think this is one of those scandals that for some reason hasn't been given the appropriate public attention?
Definitely. I think there's a number of reasons for it. I think, one, in comparison to other disasters or tragedies such as Hillsborough, we saw those horrible sights unfold on television with Grenfell. We saw the aftermath of the tower. We see it happening. But with this, these are people that have suffered behind the scenes in silence, afraid to speak out when they've got conditions such as AIDS for fear of stigma. That's one side of it. The other side, of course, is there is, and I know you'll probably want to come on this, but there is this resistance within the deepest levels of civil service in government to not let this out the bag and to not get to the bottom of this.
Why is that, Jason? What are they hiding? What's the problem?
Well, there's a number of problems. First of all, we've got to look at, in relation to this, you'll keep hearing there's a cover-up, there's been a cover-up, and the reasons why are numerous. But I think, firstly, as a country, one of the things that we do not regularly do, for any obvious reason, is destroy the records of ministers, which doesn't usually happen. But in relation to this, Lord David Owen, Health Minister at the time, just before this happened, who tried to prevent this from happening, all of his records are destroyed. He was told by the House of Lords that this was done under a 10-year rule, which when he then went to check that 10-year rule, there's no such thing. It doesn't exist. So many of the documents have been destroyed, and Lord David Owen, I've spoken to him. He gave a speech at an event I organised at the end of last year. He thinks it's because there became this awareness about what was going on in other countries in the late 80s and early 90s. And in France, you had government officials put in prison. In Germany, senior civil servants were sacked. We've seen criminal prosecutions in Japan and Canada. And here, there's been absolutely nothing like that. And so hats off to the civil service. They've done a good job so far.
And is this why you need a public inquiry, Jason? Because, as we've seen in other areas, public inquiries, we know they can, on oath, require material to be disclosed. They can interrogate people under oath as well. Do you feel that, absent that, we'll never get to the bottom of this?
I think that's obviously the case. It's been shown there's no will. It has been successive governments. It's not just one party. And that's because I don't think some of the public realise that no matter whether it's a Conservative government or a Labour government or whoever's in government, the civil servants that advise them are exactly the same. And the reason we need a public inquiry is exactly as you say. Without that, we don't have the powers to get to the bottom of it. We need a statutory public inquiry that can compel witnesses on oath, release the documents. If we look at, for example, the BPL, this is the British blood laboratory where some of these products were made. The government last year sold that off to a Chinese corporation called the Creot Group, which means that as of now, they are exempt from freedom of information requests, for example. So we need an inquiry that can compel these now private organisations to hand over their documents so we can look at the evidence.
And just finally, Jason, explain how it feels for you personally. You lost your dad. This is many years on. What continues your motivation? What does it feel like to still not get answers when you ask the questions?
It's extremely frustrating, and it's been a very long journey for me to get to this point now where we're finally, I think, getting to the heart of the issue. It's been very difficult. I think what was very heartening for me was following the episode of BBC Panorama in which I was involved last May just gone. I had quite a large number of people reach out to me, and we've now got some 70 people that we're all in touch together who have lost a parent from these blood products, Factor 8 and Factor 9 products, which, by the way, were a for-profit pharmaceutical. We're not talking about traditional blood donations, transfusions here, and that's something else that kind of gets missed in all this. There are companies out there that made literally billions of dollars off killing people.
And now you're going to try and hopefully... Well, let's Jason Evans, thank you so much indeed. Let's hope he gets his day of justice. 2,400 people with contaminated blood. We don't talk about that enough, I don't think. That is one of the great governmental screw-ups in British history, isn't it? 2,500 people had their lives imperiled by a mistake, and we're entitled to know, Jason's entitled to know why it happened, isn't he? Extraordinary. Well, I'm glad we had a chance to talk to him.